I am Philip Douglas Perks. My grandfather was Philip Henry Perks, Sr. My father was Philip Henry Perks, Jr. And my mother said there wouldn't be a third Philip Henry Perks. And what my mother said happened. So I was Philip Douglas Perks.
Doug, can you tell us a bit about where you were born and what your life was like growing up?
Oh, sure. Born right here. And I was among the last babies born at Charlestown General Hospital when it was on Congress Street. Today it's headquarters for the American Public University System. But the new hospital was under construction and just nearing completion in January of 1948 when I was born here in Charlestown. Charlestown, of course, at that time was a much smaller community. The county, when I was a kid, had 20,000 residents. And most everybody knew everybody, as you can imagine. An example of that, when I was a junior in high school, I attended Charlestown High School, the Purple Panthers, and I was the quarterback on the football team. And the football team had a 9 o'clock curfew. My grandfather, Millard Henry Heineman, lived with us in his later years. And Granny Hyman got sick. My mother was a nurse at the hospital, and she called our family physician, Dr. Warden, and described Granddaddy's illness. And over the phone, Dr. Warden prescribed. It was about 9 o'clock at night. And he said, I want to get him started on this antibiotic, so you meet Mr. Stuck at the pharmacy, and he'll get you the antibiotic and get him started. Mr. Stuck owned Stuck and Alger Pharmacy, which is, there's an ice cream shop there today. But I was selected to drive to Charlestown to pick up the meds for my grandfather. Did so, came back, got him started. Well, the next morning, I was called to the office. Principal, Mr. William Brown, and my football coach, Mr. Kenny Sims, were both there, and the question they posed was, what were you doing in town last night after 9 o'clock? So, just shows you that I had lots of moms and dads in this small town of Charlestown as I grew up. The focus for us was the Jefferson Memorial Park. We spent all of our summer days there playing tennis, swimming at the park pool. And of an evening, the kids in town on Fridays and Saturdays went to the teenage canteen. The canteen at that time was over what was the Independent Fire Hall. It's the building which is across George Street from the courthouse, where the artists have their display room today. But on the second floor of that building was a teenage canteen. And on Friday nights and Saturday nights, we went there. It had a jukebox that cost you a dime to play a record. There were only 2 adults there. There were Mrs. Snyder and Mrs. Speck. The rest of the deal was run by the teenagers. On Saturday mornings, we went there, we cleaned up, we stocked the pretzel cans, we put pop in the pop dispenser, and then danced Friday night and Saturday night. So that's the kind of town I grew up in. Small town, lots of good friends. And as I look back on it, especially through the lens of my grandchildren, a lot more freedom. I lived on Prospect Street, and the park and the park pool was a little over a mile away from my house. Everything closed at 10 o'clock at night down there, but I was permitted to stay there till 10 o'clock, and I ran home. Sometimes kids don't have those opportunities today. I wandered the fields around Charlestown down to Ebbets Run. Today, instead of growing corn and seeing cattle in the field, they're raising houses. But I have those good memories of being a kid here in Charlestown.
Sounds like an awfully nice place to grow up.
I thought so.
Doug, how long has your family been in this area?
My great-grandfather was from Page County, Virginia, and they were tenant farmers. And after the Civil War, those farms changed, and Granddaddy migrated here to Jefferson County and worked on a farm down at Cabletown. So since he pops up in the 1880 census, since the 1880 census, he was Joseph Pekin, Pekin Perks. He and his wife Molly, who was a first-generation Irish immigrant, but they came here sometime in the 1880s.
As a kid, did you have any idea what you wanted to do when you grew up?
Yes. Since about 11 years old, I've been fascinated by the history of this place. I was a tenderfoot scout, and in 1959, the entire county, commemorated the 100th anniversary of the John Brown raid. It was a week-long commemoration, and as a scout, we were assigned on a Saturday to go to Harper's Ferry, and on the big lawn below present-day Mather Training Center at Harper's Ferry, a big green open space, they had built a facade of John Brown's fort. And on that afternoon, they recreated the capture of John Brown at Harper's Ferry. And I can still see in my mind's eye those Marines crashing through that door, hear the bang. The Marines went in and they brought out John Brown, and he already had his head bandaged. But that's where I got the bug. And of course, 1959 is followed by the centennial observance of the American Civil War. And the other thing that's important, my mom and dad made sure when I expressed this interest that I had opportunities to experience it. You know, in 1962, I was on the field when they did the centennial recreation of the Battle of Antietam. We went to Gettysburg. So I had those opportunities and started collecting books. I've still got a collection of the books that were produced by Life magazine and Look magazine and the American Civil War Encyclopedia, all those things that came out in that 1960 era. So I've always been fascinated with our history. Had the opportunity to be part of that. In 1963, the community commemorated the centennial observance of West Virginia's becoming state in the Union. I can remember when John Brown's wagon was in front of the courthouse. It was on display there in 63, 64, and 65. And in the courthouse, civic organizations in town had display cases built. They were made of plywood, slant tops, glass through the front, and a platform for display of things. Probably some of these items may have been in there. But that'll eventually become the basis for the collection here at the museum. Yeah.
So that love of history,
yes,
must have somehow led you to this institution, the old Charlestown Public Library.
Absolutely.
How did that occur?
I've just been lucky. I've had a tremendous amount of luck. A good friend of mine, you know, most guys do things other than what I did on the morning of their wedding. I had a bunch of my fraternity guys, and the wedding wasn't until 6 o'clock. So we spent the day at Harper's Ferry, and then went to Shepherdstown, and then came back to get ready to go to the wedding. And while I was in Harper's Ferry, I met a high school friend, Debbie Bumgardner, who's today Debbie Pizzatelli. And Debbie was in her first year as a seasonal ranger at Harper's Ferry. And I said, geez, you know, how'd you? She said, you just apply. I said, okay. So on a whim, I applied and was lucky enough to get the job. So I started as a seasonal ranger at Harper's Ferry in 1970. Taught history at both Charlestown Junior High School and later Jefferson High School, and maintained my contacts with Harper's Ferry, and took my kids there. You know, we had a program called Community as Classroom. And with all the great history that we have in this county, I was able to take kids to see it up close and personal, to be on the ground where things happen, which is a whole lot better than sitting there reading it in the book. Continued that. I became the director of secondary schools in the county, and continued developing those programs. We started a program at Harper's Ferry called Schoolhouse Ridge. And still to this day, the 5th grade students in these county schools go to Harper's Ferry and learn about the siege at Harper's Ferry, which took place in the fall of 1862. So I've always been involved. When I retired from the school system, I went to work for Debbie Pizzatelli. I was the education coordinator for the Harper's Ferry then Historical Association. With them for 4 years, and I found out that there was a vacancy here. So I took a chance, and I met with Sue Collins, who was then the curator of the museum, and she said, sure, we've got, you know, a part-time slot. At that time, Sue was the curator, and there were 2 women working here, Miss Katie Crane and Betsy Covey. So I was to be part of the team that was here 5 days a week, taking care of these exhibits. Unfortunately, Ms. Crane got sick right away. I worked with her very shortly. Ms. Covey and I worked together, and she went on a trip and took ill, and it incapacitated her to the extent that she wasn't here. So my second year in 2005, it was just me and Sue Collins. We were here at the museum, happy as a bear with honey.
How did your role expand since you started here? I assume you played a number of different roles.
Yes.
At this institution.
Yep. Sue was a curator, and in 2006, she named me the assistant curator. And that was the year we got the George Washington letter. It was about after Thanksgiving, and the phone rang, and I answered. And it was Miss Cornelia Brewer, and I'm paraphrasing, but in essence what she said was, I have some Washington family memorabilia. Do you think your museum would like to have it? I said, yes, ma'am, I think we would. And she gave us the letter, and she gave us the portrait that hangs, the copy of the Gilbert Stuart portrait of General Washington, a portrait of George Mason, one of very few copies of General Washington's will, a death mask. And interestingly enough, Sue was away over Christmas. She visited, her daughter lived in Sweden, and she went and spent 2 weeks with her daughter in Sweden. So it was up to me to get these artifacts here. Needless to say, I was on pins and needles, and it came through the parcel post. I went to the Ranson post office and picked up the letter, which was signed by George Washington and written about the death of his brother Charles. In 2009, the library director stepped down, and Jim Glimp, who was then the president of the board, asked if I'd be interested in being the director. So I did that. And I for a while, I did director and part-time assistant curator. Sue was here by herself. So I would come down 12 to 2 or and work with her so she could get office work done. But then it just wasn't working. So in 2010, 2010, we hired Gordon Gay to serve as the curator, and he was here on a full-time basis. Gordon had a long-time career with the National Park Service and was very familiar with curatorial work. And that's when we began to convert the collection to a database. That was the first step. Initially, Jim had at least considered making a database where we could enter all of our artifacts and photographs and so forth and so on. But that just didn't work out. So we started with a little program called Past Perfect. And it was Gordon's principal job to begin transferring all the paper records over to this database. It was in 2012, and Gordon decided that he had had enough. Matter of fact, he sold his home and moved to a retirement home in Winchester. So at that point, I just stepped down as the director and came back to the museum. Sue Collins had retired in 2011. I'd hired Jane Rissler as the curator for the museum. So Jane and I worked together there. And when I retired, I came here in 2013 again, full-time, as the assistant curator. And that's when things began to change really in the museum. I worked a full year there in 2013 and kind of decided that I'd rather work a little less time. So we hired an assistant curator, Lindsay Sullivan, who came all the way across the country from San Francisco, California, to work here at the library or to the museum as the assistant curator. She was here in 2014. So it was me, Lindsay, and Jane. And Lindsay had a great deal of expertise in museum work. And she suggested, which we did, she suggested that the museum hire a consultant to look at the collection and make suggestions about the collection and also the administration of the museum. So as a result of that, a couple of things happened. First, Jane became the director instead of the curator. She was the first director that we had at the museum. Lindsay became the curator, and Lindsay was responsible for the transition and transformation of the gallery. At the time, the visitors desk was back in the southwest corner, and she had the walls painted, had the cases moved around. The wagon, which had always been here in the center of the room, was moved here in the back corner. She put this wall, which has on the other side of it Jefferson County Museum, and moved the circulation desk to its present location. That really started upstairs. We
What is the significance of that wagon that you mentioned?
Well, Frederick Douglass said, in his view, it was not on April the 18th, 1861, that started what would become the American Civil War. Frederick Douglass said that in his view, John Brown at Harper's Ferry on October the 16th through the 18th, 1859, struck the match that lit the fuse which caused the Civil War and brought an end to slavery. So that wagon is a tangible piece of the John Brown story.
Okay. So you've talked a bit about the history, your history here. Is there any more you can say about how the organization, the museum, has changed over the past number of years?
Oh my golly, yes. Yeah. When I came here, the museum was a second-class citizen. We had, it was so aggravating. People would come in and ask for a copy of a document. And we had a printer that probably should have been in the Smithsonian Institution. It took minutes to crank out a copy. And I was so embarrassed. The people were standing there and this thing is going ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk. We had two computers. We had two Apple IIe computers. One in the corner there. And at the time, the curator's office was down the hall where the storage room is today. And everything we had was paper record. So Sue had a notebook and kept all the accessions. She made hand copies of the deeds of gift. Our photograph collection was in a 3-ring binder, typewritten, to describe the photographs. So, but you have to keep in mind, too, that the men and women who had served the museum prior to that time had done a remarkable job. When you look at the collection that we had in this museum when I started in 2004, it was not your average small town museum collection. How many have a letter written by George Washington? How many have artifacts that relate to the history? So often when you visit, especially small town museums, the collection is really kind of a warehouse. It's Grandma B's lemon squeezer and a washing machine. But our collection related to the story of Jefferson County's history. But from 2004 to 2025 has been the change akin to moving from the 19th century to the 21st century. Sue knew where every artifact was stored. And it took me several years of poking. Look underneath that cabinet there. You see the sliding door? That was full of stuff. And it took me several years to open those doors, pull the boxes out, look in, see what's there, to become familiar with the collection. But today, you put a search word in the database and it kicks out where, not only what they are, but where they are.
So the technology has made a big difference.
Tremendous difference, John. Tremendous difference. It's made the collection much more usable. And what that does too, and Lori's taken full advantage of that. She knows what we have and consequently is able to put more things on display and change things up, which is critical in a museum setting. First year she was here, I have walked past that little copper still over there, I know 1,000 times, never thought about it. And Lori saw it and right away recognized that there was a story there. And we opened up in 2024 with the Prohibition exhibit. So the transition from the way we were and how we kept record of our archives to the way it is today is not only valuable to the public, it's valuable to Lori and whoever else will be here because they'll know what we've got and can think ahead about, okay, this is where we go next. This is something new that we can, because we've got this nice display of typewriters, but really impactful.
And where does this wonderful museum get its collections from?
Initially, John, local people. When you look at the original accession file, they're principally local people that had stuff. And that's a point to make as well. It's one thing to have things that relate to the story. It's another thing to be willing to share them. And this community has always been very willing to share those. You asked the question about the wagon. The wagon was owned by two men, Melvin Talbot Strider, who owned and operated Strider's Furniture Company and Melvin T. Strider Colonial Funeral Home, and Mr. Frank Ronimus, who worked at the post office. Jointly, they owned this. And it was in Mr. Strider's will that when he died, if there was a Jefferson County Museum, it was to come here. And the museum over the years has had board members who were keenly aware of history and were able to secure items that are really pertinent to the story of our history. Mr. Roger Perry spent a great deal of time bringing the Chew battle flag back to Charlestown. It was on display in Winchester. So countless people who have contributed to the collection. And today, because I think people are comfortable with giving items to the museum, the collection continues to grow. You know, you saw a box of stuff I brought in here, but that happens every day. You know.
Do you have any particular artifacts here that are special, more special than others?
The George Washington letter.
And how does that resonate with you?
It's, you know, we know him as a farmer, and we know him as the first president of our country. We know him as a general in the American Revolution. But that was George Washington, a brother. And it was an opportunity to see him on a more personal side. You know, he remarked in the letter, I am the first and now I am the last. He was the oldest of his 5 siblings, and they had all predeceased him. It wouldn't be by much. That letter's written in September of 1799, and of course he dies 3 months later in December. But nevertheless, it just has really touched me.
And when the public comes here, are they drawn to any particular objects?
More often than not, they're drawn to the wagon. I kind of keep an eye, especially today with the new layout. More often than not. But I'd say that's probably because the first thing is the question, is this the wagon? Yeah. And yes, it is the wagon. It's not a replica. It is the wagon. Probably never been able to discover who built it or the time. But we had it verified that the carriage, at least, is the carriage that pulled Brown. Looks like the box may have been replaced, but it was the panel van of the day. It was a delivery wagon. The Sadler boys put furniture in that and delivered furniture all around the county. But I think that's probably the most often visited.
So there have been a lot of changes in this museum since you've been associated with it. We experienced the COVID epidemic recently. How did that impact you and the museum operations?
We opened on March the 17th, a Saturday, and on March 20th, then Governor Jim Justice shut the state down. And the museum from March 2020 until early June 2021. And I worked at home. The library board permitted Jane, permitted Sarah and myself to continue to work at home, and I worked at home until June 2021. Principally writing, researching and writing. I was still answering questions online. Sarah Houston, who at the time was our curator, had found an application that permitted our home computers to be connected to our museum computers. So I had access to Past Perfect, all of our document collection. And I would come in periodically to get photographs from the collection or to do some research in the Perry room. But I worked at home online for that time period and was really productive. At that time, I was writing articles for the Spirit of Jefferson called History Matters. And I must have done nearly 30. And instead of then and now pictures with a photograph of Charlestown in 1850 and a Charlestown in the same place today, I was able to write in-depth articles about Jefferson County history. So it was pretty productive.
The Spirit of Jefferson is a local newspaper.
Yes, yes. West Virginia's oldest newspaper in continuous publication since 1844, with exception of a brief period during the American Revolution.
So during COVID, it sounds like there was a lot of productive work.
Yes.
As well as some continuation of public interface.
Yes. Yeah. And like a lot of places, it really had an impact on our visitation once we reopened in June 2021. Those we close in December, but those months, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, were very lightly. We were still requiring masks, and not many, but some refused. It was also complicated by the fact that at that time, our director, Jane Rissler, was seriously ill and was fighting cancer. So we were all very particularly concerned about being safe around her. But we're gradually recovering visitation-wise.
And can you tell us about any notable events or things that happened here at the museum that stick with you?
In 2009, the Park Service and the community commemorated the 150th anniversary of John Brown's raid. And there was a big community celebration. On one of those days, and I can't recall which, but anyway, they had Descendants Day. And there were almost 400 people who were descendants of someone who had a relationship to people involved in the raid at Harper's Ferry, including a woman who was a direct descendant of John Brown. And she was here, and we talked for at length. And she told me at the time, she said that this was the first time that she had publicly acknowledged her relationship to John Brown. That her family was reticent about making it known that they had that connection. As part of that commemoration, there was a seminar, and one of the topics was John Brown, martyr or madman. And the debate got rather heated. It's a good thing we didn't have guns on the table. But 150 years after the fact, he was still able to generate a great deal of passion. So that's memorable. In 2012, Frank Buckles, who was the last surviving U.S. soldier from World War I, died. And when the museum opened in April that year, we dedicated an exhibit case to Frank Buckles. His uniform's right over there, and exhibit cards that tell the story of Frank's life. Had a remarkable life. At the age of 103, he was still driving a tractor at his farm out at the Gap View Farm.
Have you had any influential mentors in your life?
Oh my, yes. Yes. Probably the person who had the biggest impact on me was Dr. Jim Price in Shepherdstown. He was the first Shepherdstown historian laureate. And I was friends with his son. His son had juvenile diabetes, and we were very close. And I got to know Dr. Price through Jimmy, and he always kept me at arm's length. I was a Charlestown boy, and of course, Dr. Price was anything and everything Shepherdstown. He used to brag that there were people standing in line waiting to get a postal box at the Charlestown or Shepherdstown postal box because it's the most popular postal box in the United States. But eventually, he thought he had inoculated me enough that I was acceptable as company, and we developed a very close friendship. And we're working on 2 big projects when he died. But he was certainly a big influence on my love of local history.
Have you mentored people?
Not in the same relationship that I had with Dr. Price. I don't play well with others. And I think that probably has had something to do with it. Not to say that, I'm not willing to offer anything that I have, but I'm sort of a loner.
Are there any lessons that you've learned from your work life here at the museum?
I have a bad habit. I see people that I first meet, and sometimes that doesn't serve you well because you make a bad decision, and you don't know what you lose because of a decision that you've made. So during my tenure here at the museum, I have become less judgmental and more willing to give a fair shot at what people are talking about, what they want to know. So that has been the biggest change in my the way I work with people, the way I perceive people.
Where would you envision this museum 20 years from now? How might it be different?
Well, the most obvious is under the leadership of someone like our current director, Lori Wysong, the exhibits won't be static. Lori is always thinking. And last year we started talking about providing context through exhibit cards of the displays. We have a marvelous collection, and there's accurate description of each. With John Brown, the Civil War. And they're going to do the pre-American Revolution and the Revolution. So I as long as she's here, I expect that will continue. And that's an important change. The museum really, I think the next step needs a legitimate research area. An area where documents and photographs are correctly stored and also accessible, and a place for a researcher to come and be able to spread their materials out and do the research. So I would hope that would occur, but we have limitations. We're limited to Lori's office, the gallery, and the storage area. But I also think a trend which started with Jane is to make this truly the Jefferson County Museum. For a long while, the exhibits were dominated by Charlestown. and we've made an effort to try to become representative of all areas in the community. We've also began to tell the story of all citizens of the county, not just white citizens, but black citizens, and we're exploring, the Hispanic population. Laurie has now gotten students from Shepherd who have done a translation of the Brown exhibit in Spanish, so that they are able to see what that's all about. So I think that's another positive move, but to be inclusive of all the county and to be inclusive of all the people of the county, I think will continue as a positive direction for the museum.
I understand you're retiring soon from
Yes.
the museum?
Yes.
When do you think that will be?
I'm done.
Ah, okay.
I'm done. Talked with Marcella and Lori. And I'm still going to volunteer. I've got some things, I'm still going to answer research questions, and certainly anything I can help Lori with, I'll do. But as far as coming here 2-3 days a week, I'm done.
Doug, I've asked you a whole litany of questions. Is there anything I haven't asked that I should?
Can't think of it, John. The only thing, let me reiterate how lucky I've been.
Mm-hmm.
The only time I've left this county was to go to school, and I went to Morgantown, and that was a lifelong dream. I was a youngster with a transition radio, listening to the Mountaineers play football with my radio pasted to my ear. But came back home and, had offers. I was a teacher, and I had offers to teach in Loudon. I had offers to teach in Warden County, but, never really considered going anywhere else. Got a job as a park ranger. Got a job with the Harpers Ferry Historical Association. And then landed a dream job here. So I've been very fortunate. For a person who really deeply loves the history of this county. I've been very, very, very fortunate to be in a position to work with that history on a direct basis.
Well, I would say Jefferson County's been very fortunate to have you be part of it.
You're very kind.
And Doug, it's an honor to talk to you, and very much appreciate you taking the time to
Always my pleasure, John.
do this oral history.
Always my pleasure.